So I've got some follow up. We don't always have follow up, but I have a little bit of follow up today, this show, this episode.
Do tell.
And it's about Minecraft. When we talked about Minecraft a little while ago, I went back and re-listened to that episode because this weekend my younger son has been giving me the full court press on getting a copy of Minecraft for the Switch. And so I was like, I felt like uneasy about it. And so I started, doing some more looking around at things and came across a better explanation between the Bedrock and Java editions of Minecraft. And I had them completely backwards. I thought the Java edition would have been made for mobile devices, and I don't know where I got that from. But that, for some reason, that was in my head, and it felt like the Java edition was like the lesser one, and the Bedrock was the more desired one. But that's completely backwards. The Java edition was is developed for computers and more powerful hardware, and then they came out with the Bedrock edition for lower powered devices like phones, tablets, and the Switch. I feel like, and I might be right, but doesn't iOS have the Java edition?
That's a good question. I know that the version that came out a long time ago and has been rewritten, but I don't know or I don't even know for sure that's been completely rewritten, but I know that I saw posts about it being updated because that's part of the issue I had with trying to run the iOS version and join a Java server because enough has been changed that they're no longer compatible if they were before.
Yeah, so I cannot remember about that, but in one respect, it wouldn't surprise me if the iOS version was Java, because the iOS hardware is it's better than some desktop hardware. The Apple's SoC is quite powerful, at least for, I guess, single-threaded processes. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting. And so anyway, the Switch's Bedrock edition is, I think they said, I came across something. What I came across was that the Bedrock edition is slightly more buggy than the Java edition, and the Switch Bedrock edition is even more buggy than the other Bedrock editions. And all that being said, I got a copy of Minecraft for the Switch for my son because of just the way he was being a good kid, and he was exhibiting patience. He had worked out how the money was going to work, and I told him all the things that I know and described those things, and he's like, that doesn't matter to me. And I'm like, okay, then we'll go from there. But I didn't buy the digital copy. I bought I always buy the card because depending on how you download the digital copy, sometimes it needs an internet connection to verify that you can play the game. And I'm like, I don't want to deal with that, so I always buy the card when I can.
Makes sense. I think for the Switch, there may have been one or two games that I got digitally, but for the most part, I always purchase the card. Whereas, like on the PlayStation, most of the time I buy digital.
Well, the PlayStation stays in a location where you can, if I wasn't moving if it was a console that was staying connected to the TV, yeah, I would do the same. But with the Switch, the only thing I've gotten that was digital is the Mario Kart 8, and it was because it came free with the Switch, so it was a digital download. That being said, the follow-up is over, and I thought we'd talk about our topic tonight. It's one that I feel not terribly unqualified to talk about, at least, just the things I've learned about it, and from watching experts' ideas and opinions being distilled down into television programs that are speaking, what's the word? formally and informationally about it. So, I think this is sort of off the heels of watching season 2, episode 1 of The Problem with Jon Stewart.
And I would also want to go ahead and give a plug for John Oliver doing an episode on Last Week Tonight with John Oliver that is recent. I don't remember if it's the most recent or if it was one removed, but and full disclaimer up front as well. Like I know I mentioned this to you before the show, but this is a topic that I feel for some reason or another a bit overly inadequately unqualified for from a certain perspective, and fairly qualified to talk about from a different perspective. And I think that will kind of come to light and be easily understood as we talk through it. But it's an area that I, much like many of our other topics, it's an area that I have a very strong set of opinions around, and hopefully those opinions line up with what the right opinions to have would be, which I have no reason to doubt they wouldn't, especially since they go against the seeming oppression of a certain group of individuals pressing a different set of opinions on said group. So kind of the story of many topics recently.
Yeah, I was thinking it doesn't take it don't have to be. It doesn't take a lot to know that the direction, especially I think the statistic they gave out is that laws regarding transgender folks have gone up 500% in the past 5 years. That's a lot. And what I was going to say was that it doesn't take a lot of qualification to understand or to recognize that these laws are about punishing people that you disagree with. It's not about safety. It's not about penalizing people for criminal behavior. It's not that at all. It is just, similar to women's rights. It is, I disagree with this, and you must be punished for that.
And it's another area or another easy way to spot this being a problematic set of arguments in favor of such legislation is that the topic often comes up when talking about protecting the sanctity of a specific group of individuals' sports, which is an absolutely ridiculous argument to begin with. Let's just go ahead and put that on the table, that if you're placing a person's livelihood in jeopardy because you want to protect biological sex different sports groups, you've already lost the conversation.
Yeah, I agree. It's I don't know. Is it? I'm sure there is some logical fallacy that we could come up with. I don't know if it's red herring, that they're trying to protect women's sports. I'm gonna not even go out on a limb and say you don't give a shit about women's sports. Again, go ahead.
I want to. I really wish I remember which show it was. So one of the two shows that we referenced, I will make sure I put links for both in the notes because they're both excellent watches. But there was discussion about a particular law being passed in a state banning transgender athletes from competing in women's sports. And at the time that law was passed, there had been one known instance of a transgender individual competing in women's sports, and that person had done so over a decade prior and was no longer active in the sport. So at the time the law was passed, there was literally no one in that state identifying as transgender and participating in women's sports. That alone tells you that you're not doing it to protect women's sports. It's a BS argument all the way through.
Like I said, they don't give a shit about women's sports. They're just looking for ways to punish the community. And it's already hard enough to not be. So the incorrect word here would be normal, because this has nothing to do with normal, because this is not an abnormal thing. Because I think we've talked about the difference between normal and abnormal regarding psychology. This is not an abnormal issue. This is something that is not societally, or it's relatively new to start or the conversations regarding the transgender community are relatively new in society. These are not new problems in humanity, but just new things that we are being mindful of in our society and starting to demand, at least on the side of the side that you and I stand on, but demand the equality that these people deserve.
Excuse me. I want to emphasize something there again, so I want to kind of really hammer this home. In all of recorded history, there have always been individuals questioning gender and identity and the associated feelings and thoughts related to what that means. This is unequivocal. We can point to it in many different places. I will defer to either John Stewart or John Oliver, since one of the two I know discussed it in the aforementioned episodes. But this is not a new phenomenon in any way, shape, fashion, or form. It is something that is recognized as a concern by every major psychological and medical community. Where's the problem? Like, what is it that makes, and this is obviously a rhetorical question, but what is it that makes this seem to be such a pervasive problem among a very specific group of people?
I mean, the dynamic exists under many issues. Like, you can remove transgender community as the issue and replace it with gay community, and that was the issue. The gay community,
reproductive rights.
I was going to say regarding the gay community, they fought for a few decades. I mean, it's still not, I don't know that it's still perfect. There's still issues. I think there will always be issues, but this same thing goes with non-white community. But the issue is that people think that the values that they should have are only the values that benefit their position. Or honestly, maybe the values that they have only benefit white men. And I'm not entirely sure where I was going with this, but it's just this.
So I have the feeling that I have a rant coming on.
Okay.
Because we're trying not to necessarily point the finger, I think, in what we said, and I'm kind of willing to point the finger.
I was going to say, should we point the finger?
There's a major general problem with regard to the way our general representation with regard to government approaches things. And that is, there seems to be this belief that the United States is a Christian nation officially.
Yeah.
And Christian values should dictate societal norms and legislation. And that is horrifically wrong.
Right. Like, make America great again might as well be make America white again.
Yeah.
And this idea that this country is for white Protestant Christians is untrue. Maybe that's who's been benefiting for the longest in this country, but that's not who this country is for.
And just to emphasize a step further, it's not even just those who are quite loud, who we would point to as being toward one end of the spectrum or another, as far as being an evangelical, whatever that means for your personal definition. This is, generally speaking, the same problem with the way traditional Christian churches have approached teaching everything about the religion. And it's really difficult to separate the problem with how Christianity is presented to so many people with or away from what that brings from a behavior standpoint. And so part of me does wonder which is the more impactful influence. Was it that people in power found this latching onto a fairly strong subset of what they have interpreted to be Christian values and morals and beliefs, and applied that through legislation because of their beliefs? Or has it been because of the way such beliefs have been misguidedly taught for so long that it's just kind of a natural comfort point? You know, it brings a feelings of, well, they must be right because this is what I've heard all my life, that kind of thing. It seems like I'm kind of unsure how to describe that point, but the idea really, in my mind, starts to be which one truly is pushing the narrative. Is it, from a political perspective, rallying these people to vote to retain power, or is it fed more from this has been the consistent narrative among these different regions, and so someone who starts using those as talking points gets elected and then just continues to push that narrative? Does that make sense? That may be a better way to describe the disparate thought between the two.
It makes sense to me, what you're saying.
Not to take the conversation away from, where we started, because it's what I want to make sure of, because I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but I want to make sure that I illustrate there is a conundrum when talking about the pushing of an interpretation of Christian values onto others, of not being entirely certain where that comes from, what's truly driving it. And that's all I was really wanting to illustrate with that line of questioning, but I wanted to make sure that was included, because it has gone on long enough that I don't think it is something you can separate easily from politics versus attempting to educate the population en masse.
I think we always end up in a location like this because transgender rights is a symptom. The gender war is a symptom. The culture war is a symptom. The attack on women's rights is a symptom. The attack on the gay community is a symptom. And the problem is trying to impose a particular moral standard on that a group of people hold for themselves onto everybody in this country, when it does not consist of criminal behavior, but rather a particular moral decision that is based on misinterpretation of an ancient text that was passed down verbally for centuries, and then written in an ancient language and translated into another ancient language and taught in another ancient language, and then taught in a dead language. I might have gotten some of that wrong, but maybe you get the drift here. This is not It's like if you, as an American, you have the right to believe these. You have the right to choose to live your life in such a way such that it doesn't infringe upon others, and worship in the way that you choose. And if you're thoroughly American, you will support the right for everyone to live in that way. However, when your rights start to infringe upon mine, and again, when it does not include criminal behavior, or then you have overstepped your bounds.
So I want to clarify.
Yeah.
One thing that it's on the border of being a semantic argument, but I think you'll get why I want to make sure it's clarified. It's not just criminal behavior, but whether willing or unwilling, harmful behavior. And the only reason I want to make the distinction is because while going into a theater and yelling fire is now considered a criminal action, something similar may not be codified into criminal law, but could still be an intent to harm others.
I really appreciate you correcting that. Like, harmful behaviors is it includes things that we have not made laws for, whereas criminal is specific to the laws that have been made. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Whereas, and then there are certain things that we've made laws for, then so now they're criminal behavior, but they are actually not harmful and should not be criminal. So,
yeah, and I figured it was worth emphasizing a little bit there, just because.
Yes, I agree.
One of the fundamental problems that I see with the way different groups are targeted for legislative action in some fashion. So be it the removal of protections for reproductive rights, the inability for same-sex couples to get married, the separation and removal of support for transgendered individuals, like any of these things. You could pick any of them that you wanted. The main problem that I have is that all of these are very clear. This group of people cannot do this thing I don't want them to do. And there's no harm toward those people who are creating the legislation or other individuals. There's and I know we've talked about it, so I don't want to go into that argument altogether, but there is a misguided appropriation of harm in the reproductive rights discussion. We've talked about before why it's irrelevant and BS. Let's just put it as a side note here that it has been discussed. If someone wants to request a further discussion of it, we'll be more than happy to. But for the purposes of this particular episode, we acknowledge that there's a very far-flung, really wrong argument that some could make about potential harm with regard to reproductive rights. That same harm does not exist in the other discussions, or the same even potential for perceived harm. And anytime you are telling someone that what they feel or believe or want to engage in, assuming that it is not
harmful
and harmful to others or harmful to the self, could be an argument that's a bit more subjective. That's going to depend on some discussions with other experts. But generally speaking, if you're attempting to regulate behavior and that behavior is not harmful, you're the problem.
Yes. Yeah.
And when you're attempting to regulate behavior that all of the people involved with mental and emotional and physical health and well-being say not to regulate, that's actually more dangerous than providing proper supportive care, then you're fucking insane.
I mean, if you watch, I haven't watched the episode of Last Week Tonight regarding this topic, but if you watch the episode of The Problem with Jon Stewart on gender wars, it's you are out of your ability to distinguish between right and wrong, good and, good and bad, harmful and unharmful, helpful and unhelpful.
This is the big thing that just continually gnaws at me with regard to all the conversations that we have that are along this vein that I just can't fathom. And that is, I don't want anyone to be in a worse state than they should be based on the available access to meaningful care. And what that means varies. Like your needs, somebody else's needs can be different. I don't care if it's hunger.
Yeah.
I don't care if it's shelter. I don't care if it's mental health, physical health. Take your pick. Every last one of those things should be met for every single individual, period.
I mean, it is society. It is bad actors in society that is the reason why we don't have that. Why not everyone has been taken care of. It is not for a lack of resources. There's a couple of things I wanted to pull back in on, and that was that one of them was, I think there's this misconception that the treatment that a child will get, and when I say child, someone under the age of 18, just because that is where we have decided as a society to draw the line for better or for worse. But a child,
depending on the topic,
oh, that's true. If it's renting a car, then the line is 25.
And in some states, if it's sexual relationships with someone else, it's 16.
16. Ah, Jesus. Anyway, the idea that children are choosing to be transgender or identifying as transgender is false. It is not a choice. It is who they are. And if you are, like as a person, if you're comfortable in how you have been described your whole life, it's hard to understand that. The choice comes when you want other people to know that you identify that way. Not that you are that way, but whether you want people to know that you identify a particular way. I think that's where the choice is. And I think that has been maybe problematic for people who are willing to understand, but haven't quite understood.
That's a good point. I think it's important to take it a step further. One thing that is often missing from this conversation that I failed to remember to mention a lot of times, gender is a social construct.
Yeah.
People don't like to hear that because it's uncomfortable to acknowledge that this thing that we've always equated to a physical attribute is not actually, in fact, related to a physical attribute.
Well, the physical attribute isn't even binary. It's not even as binary like we like to think, or it like seems.
Correct. And right. I know we've mentioned that before as well, but it's one of those things where,
but no,
the lack of comfort around exploring a different concept, that piece is important to emphasize. And I don't have a good way to describe it. I think maybe we'll do a follow-up on that particular behavioral component at some point. But the kind of in line with, I love pulling in other topics, kind of in line with labeling things, right? How we understand concepts is how we can relate them to other things that we understand. That's a kind of, in general, in a very broad context, why labels are important to navigating life. And we've often equated this label of gender with a label of biological sex because that's how they've always been discussed and intertwined. And that discomfort from recognizing that they are not actually intertwined and have no bearing on each other makes it difficult to understand the concept of gender. So that's where I was going with the overall point, is that I certainly get that it can be very uncomfortable when you make the realization that gender is not actually this thing you thought it was, and has never been inextricably tied to it the way you've always heard it explained or thought or seen or felt portrayed. Gender is 100% a social construct.
Yes. I think that's well said, because it just, when you get used to this, when you get used to being in a particular social construct and that gets challenged, it's sometimes hard to accept. It's like, an easier, like a more common comparison would be like if you go to a country on the other side of the world, the social expectations are quite different. But it feels more obvious because, you've worked a certain amount to get to the other side of the world. So it feels like, yes, it should be different, but where I am right here should not be different. And so when you start to challenge those things at home, or once you get outside of the bubble that you live in, it can be uncomfortable. One of the things I really liked about that was brought up in the Jon Stewart show was the spectrum of masculinity. I thought I was amused by that, because I've always felt myself a relatively masculine man, but I've always thought, it was like, but I'm also nurturing. And I was like, who's to say that a nurturing man is not masculine? And it turns out that I personally have come to start labeling things, because I feel like this is a great place to use this label, but anything that is labeled as masculine but harmful as toxic masculinity. And so isn't that, and this is literally me not knowing how popular use of the phrase toxic masculinity is actually purveyed, because I think of it very similar to how you've just described it. But is that not how the phrasing is actually used day to day in most circles? Is. Okay. It absolutely is. I'm using it correctly. I'm not doing anything radical here. I'm not even doing.
Yeah, and it was just wanting to clarify that I wasn't misunderstanding some other popular use case for the phrase.
Oh, no. I'm just slapping that label on a lot of things, because there's a lot of things that carry that label. The other thing I kind of wanted to touch on, and this was the last thought I had, and I want to be pretty ambiguous here, but one of my kids has a classmate that is transgender, and it was an interesting thing to see, because I remember being asked about it by another friend of mine whose kid is in the same class, and he's like, "Have you seen?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I hadn't heard." And then like a few months later, I was like, "Oh, I saw some posts on Facebook, and it was like, oh, this is what my friend was talking about," because the classmate is going by a name that is societally we would say, oh yeah, that's a different gender than the first name they had. Again, I'm trying to be as ambiguous as possible, but getting the point across. And I was like, oh, it kind of struck me, even though like I have been around, like I have learned so much, like, because I'll say like I knew so little about the issues that the transgender community faces, and I learned so much from some adult friends that I've been around and have been talking about the issues that they faced being a transgender couple, and then to see like a minor exhibiting the same thing, and that minor's parents have been incredibly open and accepting of this position, that it's been interesting to see what they went through versus what this minor's going through, and it's been good. And the hope I have here is that my child that's classmates with this other child doesn't think anything of it. It's like, hey, the name that you met when I met you, this was the name that I went by. But I have, through what I know with my parents, I am telling you that I am this person. This is actually who I am. And so now I'm going to go by this name. The choice is that you get to see this happening in me. And my kid was like, okay. Like, it was not a thing for them. Like, it was not weird. There were no weird questions. It made me feel good to see that, like, this generation, like our children's generation, at least what I've seen is that nobody's really questioned it that I know of. And that they're like, I get it. And it's not a thing. Or it's not a negative thing. It's only been that I know have been positive and reaffirming. And I think that's all we should be going for, is positive and reaffirming of who you are.
It's interesting to end up with that phrasing, because the same group of people who want to impose certain views often quote a particular book in some way, shape, fashion, or form. And they seem to fail to recognize that if you actually take the time to read said book and understand the teachings within, that everything is about loving and supporting others. That's the secret.
We have a number of different ways set up for you to get in touch with us to provide feedback, ask questions, or just comment in about something we've discussed.
You can hit us up on Twitter or Instagram at untitled_hosts, or shoot an email over to untitled.hosts@gmail.com.
Or get in touch directly with Jesse at jthart.com, or get in touch with me, John, via telepathy.
If you would like to support our work or are interested in listening to our new after show feed, head over to patreon.com/theUntitledPodcast and take a look at the options we have set up.
Thank you for listening.
We hope you've enjoyed the show.
And we hope to connect with more of you as we continue this journey.
That's a wrap.